I was one of those people who went to college knowing exactly what they wanted to do. I'd grown up in an area where I saw a lot of really good television journalists, so I knew that's what I wanted to do. By the time I was a first semester senior, I had a television reporting job.
Barry Ray, News Channel 10.
We were fortunate enough where I was, we had enough major stories that we were focused on bringing the events of people's area to them on a daily basis. In between Dallas and Austin, not far from Houston, there were no shortage of big stories. I had covered major airline crashes. Just 3 years before the Branch Davidian thing, I covered what was at that time the largest mass murder in U.S. history. But it was a very big adrenaline rush to cover big stories and to feel the responsibility to relate it to people in an accurate way so that they could make some sense of what was going on. I was the only reporter who had ever actually been to the Branch Davidian compound. Most everybody else covered it that day, but I knew the people. There had been a brush with the law that at that time his name was Vernon Howell, but later he became David Koresh. He had been in trouble with the law with a shootout with a former leader of the Branch Davidians. And in covering his trial, I also covered entertainment news, and he had a rock and roll band that he desperately wanted me to feature. And so he gave me a cassette tape after his trial, and he gave me his business card and really wanted me to feature them. It was not long after that the day happened, and that day started for me like any other day. It was a Sunday. So I was at my church doing my thing, teaching college-age Sunday school kids, and another reporter by the name of John McLemore was up very early in the morning. He had been tipped by the ATF that a raid was going to happen. So he and a photographer were very hush-hush because them and the newspaper were going to be the only ones going in that morning. So I got home from church and there was 100 phone messages, and they said, you've got to get out to Mount Carmel as quickly as you can. You know, John and Dan, the photographer, their car got shot up and they witnessed something horrific and they're kind of shell-shocked, and we need a veteran reporter out there. So I jumped in the car, and the rest of the day became a blur. Once I got there and they got to leave, one of the photographers who was there at the initial raid was still there, and he and I spent the night in the live truck, and I did a live news report every hour on the hour for 24 hours. And it was pouring down rain while the FBI was trying to talk David Koresh out of the inside of the building. David Koresh was not a person who hid. He went out and he was in town. He would go and try to recruit people. I'd seen him around town before. He jogged every morning. He could have been taken quietly without the confrontation. It was very unfortunate because his whole message to his followers was an apocalyptic message. And so by making the big show of force that the ATF did, they more or less emboldened his followers to say all this stuff he's been telling us was true. And that's what made them, shoot their guns the way they did that day. So there was an awful lot of things that could have been done differently. On the very first night, I didn't know this until years later. I don't know if it's true, but I heard that on that first night that David Koresh said, all I want you to do is send Barry Ray in. He's a reporter that knows us. He'll treat our message fairly. And I said, I'm not positive that happened. Nobody ever told me that it did, but I had heard through the grapevine that that's one thing he requested. There was a man in the corner of the room came up and he said, that stuff you said about him asking for you to come in, he said, that's true, he did. And I said, well, why didn't y'all send me in? He had been with the FBI. He said, we weren't going to send a civilian in there. But I would have gladly done it. I did not feel like the situation made those people into, warriors. They were not that way before. They were just common folk maybe a little misguided in their theology. One of the first people to die in the shootout was an old man by the name of Perry. He made perfume, homemade perfume, and he would bring it to the TV station to visit with us and sell his perfumes by Perry. And he got shot and killed in the initial raid. I think I looked at it a lot differently just because of the fact that I knew those people, knew several of them before the thing happened. So whereas for a lot of people, there was 83 faceless, nameless folks who were killed, I knew several of them, and I'd been out there on the compound and interviewed them before. So I was really remorseful that it had to go down the way it did. A young girl I later found out was one of David Koresh's teenage wives. She was taking me around, and we got to there at that point just building the thing you saw burn up. And I was told that was not a place I could go.
Apocalypse in hopes of finding the 40 remaining bodies, including that of Koresh himself. In Waco, Barry Ray, News Channel 10 tonight.
Because I spent so many nights out there during the 6 weeks of the siege, one of the things I did most nights was they kept the media a couple of miles from the actual compound, but they couldn't tell a private landowner what to do with his land. And there was a man who had the adjacent farmland next to the Mount Carmel compound, and he allowed us to put an RV on his property. And CBS News built a tower right next to the RV, and they kept their camera trained on the compound all night, and then we would do live shots there. Well, while I was gone, my wife was home with a small child, a toddler, scared to death. We lived out in the country, and as crazy as this sounds, there was a feeling like among a lot of people that he had gotten out, that David Koresh was not even in the compound. And so there was this thought of, he's going to look for somebody he knows, and he's going to find out where I live, and he's going to go to my house while I'm out here. Those kinds of crazy thoughts go through your mind. I was just exchanging some communication the other day with John McLemore. Neither one of us have talked a whole lot about that thing. It's something that we just buried for a long, long time. And it took me years before I really wanted to talk about it. He still hasn't. And he's turned down hundreds of requests for interviews because it was so traumatic for him. But we've been in communication lately, and we're both of the mind that it's finally time for the reporters to tell the story the way they witnessed it. We've heard a lot from the FBI. We've heard a lot from people who are gun rights advocates. We've heard from the ATF. We've heard from the U.S. government, but we haven't heard from the reporters who were there. So over the next couple of years, I think we're going to sit down and find the best way to tell our story.